There's nothing quite like purging the xenos and heretics with a big bolter and a suit of power armor, so today we're talking about the Primaris Intercessors and the new options they've got in the new Space Marine Codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we'll be taking a look at the core of the Space Marine army, the Intercessor Squad. Games Workshop's upgraded hulking tactical marines that are harder to kill, fightier in melee, and pack an additional punch with their bolt rifle. I'd like to say a quick thank you to Revenant, one of my first subscribers, who requested a video on the different types of bolt rifles, and I thought if we're covering them, we really need to cover the entire squad, as it's quite a complicated question really. Today we're going to have a look at the unit's stats and options, discuss which are best, and then go on to look at the various combos, stratagems and tactics we can use on the tabletop. This video is continuing my series of new Space Marine unit reviews, so if you want to see some more, consider subscribing. The fluff behind these guys is that they form the core of the Space Marine battle line, often used to plug gaps and lay down coordinated salvos of bolter fire, while the rest of the elite Space Marine army operates around them, achieving more distinct objectives. So without further ado, let's get into the rules. The Intercessor Squad is a troops choice for Codex Space Marines that consists of 5 Intercessors, including 1 Intercessor Sergeant. You can buy an extra 5 Intercessors for 17 points per model, up to a maximum of a 10-man squad. At 17 points per model, it means that the base 5-man squad is 85 points. Unlike Tactical Marines, there is no option to take either a special weapon or a heavy weapon, but they can change out their different bolt rifles, as we'll come on to in a second. Intercessors have the standard Primaris Space Marine stat line with movement 6, weapon skill and ballistic skill of 3 up, strength 4, toughness 4, 2 wounds, 2 attacks, leadership 7 and a 3 up save. The sergeant has 3 attacks and a leadership of 8. Each model is equipped with a bolt rifle, bolt pistol and frag and crack grenades. You have the option to trade out the entire squad's weapons for either an entire squad of Stalker bolt rifles or auto bolt rifles. There's no mixing and matching between the two, unfortunately. For every 5 models in the unit, one of them can take an auxiliary grenade launcher, which essentially allows one model to fire a grenade at 24-inch range. It only costs 1 point extra to do so, so it's generally worth doing. The sergeant has the option to swap his bolt rifle out for a chainsword or a hand flamer, which I certainly wouldn't bother doing, or he can take one of the Intercessor Sergeant weapons completely in addition to his regular gear. So that's either a chainsword, power fist, power sword, or thunderhammer. So you might as well take the chainsword and bolt rifle, rather than keeping the next to useless bolt pistol, if you want a chainsword. The squad has the Angels of Death special rule, so it gets the bolter discipline, which means that you can rapid fire your bolt rifles if you're standing stationary. Shock Assault, which gives you 1 extra attack on the charge or when you are charged, so they'll typically have 3 attacks in the first round of combat. And also the Combat Doctrines roll, which will let them add 1 AP to either their regular bolt rifles or auto bolt rifles when they're in the Tactical Doctrine, or their Stalker bolt rifles when they're in the Devastator Doctrine. They also have the Combat Squad special rule, allowing a 10-man squad to be broken down into 2 5-man squads when you deploy them. So let's have a chat about the different bolt rifle options then. Firstly, your standard bolt rifle is a 30-inch rapid-fire 1 weapon with a strength of 4, AP-1 and damage 1. It's a good jack-of-all-trades weapon, good for sitting back and shooting the enemy from afar, has a little AP, but not as many shots as the auto bolt rifle. The auto bolt rifle is Assault 3, 24-inch range, strength 4, AP nothing and damage 1, so it sacrifices a little range and 1 pip of AP for an additional shot and the assault weapon special rule. Finally, we have the Stalker bolt rifle, which is 36-inch range, heavy 1, strength 4, AP-2 and damage 2. So it's your go-to weapon for sitting a long way back and maybe having a shot at harder enemy targets such as elite infantry, or maybe trying to scrape some wounds off vehicles. Now I think the decision on which bolt rifle to go with is actually very tricky. They're all viable. I could happily run any one of these, and they only have minor advantages over each other. Let's talk about the Stalker Bolt Rifle first. The Stalker Bolt Rifle is great for a squad that is sat at the back of your army, capturing an objective while laying down a bit of long-range firepower. It's particularly good if your army is struggling for anti-heavy infantry weapons as opposed to anti-horde weapons. It's particularly worth considering when you're running an Iron Hands list, as it can move and shoot with no penalty and gets free rerolls of 1. Also, it's worth considering whenever you're using an army such as Iron Hands that likes to be in the Devastator doctrine all game, as it will gain an additional pip of AP. It also has a strat for targeting characters, which we'll come on to later. Obviously, it is nowhere near as good against hordes as the other two options, as it only has 1 shot. Moving on, the Assault Bolt Rifle is amazing against hordes, but has a slightly shorter range, and no AP. I'd say it would usually tend to beat out the standard bolt rifle in terms of shooting at soft targets, and basically anything that has a 3-up save. It will be worse when the target has a 2-up save, either say Space Marines in cover, or when targeting something tough like Terminators for example. You will generally want this to be on a unit that's advancing up the board, as otherwise it might well not get to shoot, as the 24-inch range can be quite short for if it's just a unit that's sat in your own deployment zone. This thing will do great with armies that want to be in the tactical doctrine, say Raven Guard and Ultramarines, because when it gets access to just 1 pip of AP, it will genuinely outperform the bolt rifle in all circumstances. So if you have an advancing Intercessor squad that is likely to be in the tactical doctrine for most of the game, then this is definitely your pick. And finally we come on to the standard bolt rifle, which is sort of a halfway house between the Stalker and the auto bolt rifle. It's generally not quite as good against the specific targets that the auto bolt rifle and Stalker bolt rifle are best against, but it will do a reasonable job against most targets at a good range and a better one than the auto bolt rifle. I would tend to pick this one if you're thinking about being in the tactical doctrine, if you're thinking about using the Intercessor squad to hold objectives in your own deployment zone, and if you're maybe a little bit lighter on anti-infantry than anti-tank or elite infantry. All that being said, I think that you could easily justify any of these, and it's more of a personal preference decision than an objective this one is better type thing. Let's quickly discuss the other options available to the squad. I generally think that the grenade launcher is worth taking, just as 1 strength 6 AP-1 D3 damage shots will generally outweigh one of your intercessors firing its bolt rifle. This is particularly true when you're using the Master Artisan's trait or Salamanders to allow you to re-roll that 1 strong shot. It's only a very marginal thing though, so it's definitely not mandatory by any means. Now the Sergeant can take some various close combat weapons. I would always take the chainsword on the Sergeant as it's a free upgrade that costs nothing, so the decision is whether you would buy anything else to replace that. The Intercessor Sergeant does have a decent amount of attacks. He has 3 attacks with 4 due to shock assault. In the right matchups, buying a close combat weapon or 2 could be very deadly indeed, and it's kind of up to you how much you want to go in on this strategy. The power sword is very reasonable at only 4 points, will help it out against medium infantry. In Blood Angel's Intercessors this is certainly a very good choice, as it combos nicely with the +1 to wound. The Power Fist and Thunder Hammer are both much better for helping you out against hard targets, and can pack a nasty surprise if the opponent decides to try and charge your Intercessors with something nasty. That being said, unless you have some way of delivering these guys into close combat, such as an impulsor or some stratagem, I don't usually think it's going to be too worthwhile to invest lots of points in that, as they're only really ever going to reach close combat if the enemy is happy to meet them there, because 6-inch movement isn't going to get them very far very fast. You can incidentally do some funny things by making the Sergeant a relic bearer via the supplement Codex stratagems and giving him a damage 4 Thunder Hammer, which is very funny, but I don't think it's actually a very good use of command points in a competitive game, as you may as well spend the command points to buff your characters, which are quite a bit better and harder to kill. So, now we've had a chat about the unit and what options it can take, let's look into what combos and options you have for running them at an army level. Firstly, let's think about the chapter tactics that you can use for them, and to put it simply, Intercessors can benefit from basically any chapter trait. Ultramarines are great because you have the option to fall back and shoot with their bolt rifles should that be the better option, and also they can move and count as remaining stationary, which is great for the regular bolt rifle. White Scars will very much like their auto bolt rifles because they can advance, shoot them, then charge after advancing. Iron Hands will love their Stalkers because they get the reroll ones, get to move and shoot heavy weapons for no penalty, and they'll likely be in the Devastator Doctrine. Also 6-up Feel No Pain is very nice for the multi-wound Primaris models. Raven Guard should be happy with any of the bolt rifle variants, just hug cover and have that really nice -1 to hit for a infantry unit. Crimson and Imperial Fists get one of the biggest buffs, which is extra hits on 6s with bolt weapons, which is a 25% damage increase on the unit's fire output, regardless of which bolt rifle you're using. And Salamanders gets a nice little reroll, 1 hit and 1 wound per unit, and a little bit of extra durability against AP-1 weapons. Frankly, you really can't go too far wrong with Intercessors in any Space Marine army, which is as it should be really. In terms of characters and aura abilities, there's quite a lot that Intercessors benefit from as well. Captains and Lieutenants will always boost their damage output, as they're also particularly good receivers of the Chapter Ancients banner bonus, allowing them to get some extra shots when they're killed. The Chaplain's +1 to wound or +1 to hit abilities can also be handy, as could his rerolls in melee potentially. Intercessors certainly aren't a bad unit to build a bit of a castle around as you advance up the board with a Chapter Master, Lieutenant and Chapter Ancient, so that all these buffs help each other. There are quite a few stratagems that impact the Intercessors in a big way, so let's have a chat about them now. Firstly, there's the Veteran Intercessors stratagem, so that's either 1 or 2 CP based on how big the unit is. It costs 2 CP if there are 6 or more Intercessors in the unit, and this essentially adds +1 attack and +1 leadership to every model in that unit. This does make them legitimately more scary in close combat, and further upgrades the Sergeant, potentially letting him get a lot of attacks out of whatever special war gear that he happens to have. You could, for example, have a 5 attack Sergeant with a Thunder Hammer here. I personally think that the cost is a little bit steep for what it gives you, and I'd only tend to buy this in if you actually have a way of delivering them into close combat with some reliability, such as, say, an Impulsor or a deep striking or outflanking stratagem. I might have rated it a little bit higher if it was 1 CP for 10 Intercessors, but at 2 CP for 10 that's getting quite steep, particularly if you were thinking about buying it in for multiple squads. If you do have multiple Intercessor squads just in your battle line, I wouldn't just put this on one of the units, because then that unit will just be shot down as a priority target because it is better than the others. Next we have Bolt Storm, which is a 2 CP stratagem used for the auto bolt rifles. You select one of your Intercessor squads, and all of the auto bolt rifles in that squad automatically hit if they're within half range of their maximum range. Their maximum range is 24 inches, so that would be a 12-inch range. On a full unit, that essentially adds up to round about 10 extra hits, which I don't think is too amazing, seeing as they're only strength 4, AP minus nothing, and I wouldn't tend to usually pay 2 CP for that level of firepower. Next we have Rapid Fire, which is again 2 CP, and this affects the regular bolt rifles. It turns them into Rapid Fire 2 instead of Rapid Fire 1, so essentially they're all toting Storm Bolters for the turn. And when I say Storm Bolters, I mean Storm Bolters with an extra AP minus 1, which is just great. Again, I'd only ever be tempted to use this on a full unit of Intercessors to get your maximum bang for your buck. This is better value than the other one, because on a max squad unit, you'll get 13 extra hits, and these are better hits at strength 4, AP minus 1. If you have a captain, then that only goes up, so it's far more worthwhile than Bolt Storm. There's also no range penalty attached either, so they're happy to just sit at 30 inches, not move, and rapid fire for 4 shots at the enemy. Next is Target Sighted, which is the special strat for the Stalker bolt rifles. Now this is potentially very nasty, but it does cost 3 CP, so it's quite a big cost for accessing this effect. Again, you pick one Intercessor squad in your army, and the Stalker Bolt Rifles can target characters even if they're not the closest miniature, and on a wound roll of 6 or more, they inflict 1 mortal wound to the target in addition to their regular damage. With how nasty Stalker Bolt Rifles can be, this should equal 1 dead character unless it's something exceptionally tough. Your question has to be, is this worth the 3 CP to do the stratagem, plus not shooting those Stalker Bolt Rifles at a different target, which obviously you could do without paying any CP at all. So potentially game winning if you snipe a key character that your enemy's strategy depends upon, but otherwise quite a steep cost for the price of doing so. There's a few others to just bear in mind. Steady Advance can allow bolted discipline for regular bolt rifles even if the squad moved. So say you had to move your unit of 10 Intercessors with bolt rifles, you could still have bolted discipline if you were prepared to pay 1 CP for this strat. If you absolutely had to move and wanted the extra firepower, well, this isn't actually a bad pickup. We have Transhuman Physiology, which can give your Space Marines an extra boost of survivability when they need it, until the end of the phase when resolving an attack made against that unit, and a modified wound roll of 1 to 3 always fails. So for toughness 4 units, that's actually really quite good because there are some things that are going to be wounding them on 2s, anything strength 8 for example. So that's an option for 2 CP. You can also spend a CP to break a 10-man unit into 2 5-man units mid-game, which I think is a very niche stratagem, but one to bear in mind. So now we've gone over all the units options. How would they fit into an actual Space Marine list? They're really quite good for filling up troops choice slots to unlock CP for battalions, being only 85 points for quite a lot of Space Marine power. I think you always have to compare Intercessors to Incursors or Infiltrators as to whether you want the extra ability to set up outside of your deployment zone for a few extra points, or to Tactical Marines if they're objective camping, as then you could have a Tactical Marine squad for 5 men with a heavy weapon included for less than the cost of the Intercessor squad. Obviously the attacks are less durable, so it's a decision to be made. If you're looking at the auto bolt rifles for advancing up the board, you have to look closely at Aggressors, which fill the same role. Obviously Aggressors aren't troops, so don't help fill up battalions, but in general I would say Aggressors are better than auto bolt rifle Intercessors at a durable close combat threatening units moving up the board, laying down loads of strength 4 shots. Aggressors have a better damage output and I'd say a similar durability, as they're 3 wounds per model and have toughness 5, but you get approximately double the amount of Intercessors as Aggressors. Other advantages are that they can double their firepower if they don't move, and they have some very nasty close combat, which in general is better than the Intercessors' close combat. As for me personally, I would happily field any of the 3 variant of Intercessor bolt rifles. I think I would typically run them as 5-man squads to fill up a battalion and save the extra points for more nasty elites such as say Aggressors or other hard-hitting units. I would typically pay the 1 extra point for the option of firing the grenade at 30 inches, and I would take a chainsword on the sergeant and nothing else to keep the squad costs low. I can see the argument for spamming an absolute ton of Intercessors, and if you do, then I'd think about taking some 10-man squads to make more efficient use of their stratagems. In game, I'd typically start these guys in cover and either advance them up the board if they had auto bolt rifles, or just stay back plinking shots away if they have either of the other 2 variants. If the enemy ever gets too close with a squishy unit or something that you could lock up in close combat, then you could happily charge the Intercessors in, as they do have a respectable melee stat line. In general, these guys are just very good at taking objectives because they're decently durable, but maybe not quite as high damage output units for Space Marines. Also, they have the objective secured rule being troops. Overall, I'd rate the Intercessors as a very competitive unit for Space Marines, and they have lots of synergies with pretty much every chapter or tactic that you could go for. I'm glad to say that Games Workshop have fixed these guys, as they were a bit lackluster when they came out, and it's always good to see standard Space Marines being strong enough to hold their own on the nastiest battlefields of the 41st millennium. I'll post a couple of links down to my Aggressors video and Infiltrators video, as I think you should consider these guys if you are thinking about running Intercessors en masse to provide some different options to your army. Thanks very much for listening, and I'm going to continue with my Space Marine unit reviews over the next couple of weeks. If there are any great tricks that I've missed with Intercessors, or I've got any rules wrong, please post them down in the comments below and I'll get back to you. Thanks very much for watching All Space Tactics, and I'll see you in the next video.